Liam leaned forward in his seat, his voice dripping with a brand of casual arrogance that made my stomach knot with unease. He and my sister, Leona, shared a secretive glance, both of them practically glowing with smugness as they prepared to drop whatever bombshell they had planned. I could sense it in the tightness of the air, in the way my parents averted their eyes. Something big was coming, something I already suspected I would not like. "We wanted you to know now so there's no confusion later," Liam said, his lips curving into a half-smile that felt more like a sneer. "Everything goes to us," he finished, tossing the words across the table as though it were the simplest fact in the world. My brother's statement hit me like a punch to the gut, and I stared down at my plate of homemade lasagna, the very meal Mom had promised would be a family favorite for our long-awaited dinner together. Suddenly, that savory smell of tomato sauce and melted cheese felt nauseating, weighing me down with a sense of dread. The family dining room, with its polished cherrywood table and a chandelier that glimmered softly overhead, seemed to close in around me. Silence thickened until I forced myself to speak. I cleared my throat and looked between Liam and Leona, my voice shaking despite my best efforts to steady it. "Excuse me," I murmured. "What exactly do you mean by everything?" Leona leaned back, crossing her arms. She had always been the more theatrical one, leaning into drama whenever it suited her. "What he said," she repeated, flicking a glance at Mom and Dad for backup. Mom folded her napkin and set it on the table, her lips compressing into a thin, defiant line. "Sara," Mom interrupted, "we want to be clear about our will. The house, the lake cottage, and the rest of our property are all going to Liam and Leona. Your father and I wanted you to hear it directly from us, so there's no misunderstanding." I turned to Dad, half hoping I might catch a flicker of guilt or regret in his expression. His gaze, however, remained fixed on the utensils in front of him. He refused to look at me, and my heart throbbed painfully at his silence. The stillness in the room felt suffocating until Dad finally spoke, choosing his words with careful restraint. "Sara, you've done extremely well for yourself," he said. "We're proud of the career you've built, but Liam and Leona still need more support, more stability, and we believe this is the right decision." I had to bite back the incredulous laugh that threatened to burst from my chest. 4 years, I'd been quietly paying my parents' mortgage and covering Liam's endless school expenses or money leaks. I'd also footed the bill for Leona's extravagant hobbies, anything from pricey photography equipment to a new keyboard when she decided, on a whim, to pursue music. And now, here they sat, telling me I didn't need any inheritance because I'd done too well. My success was punishing me in my parents' eyes. "Support," I repeated bitterly, trying to keep my composure. I stared at Mom, wanting an explanation beyond the empty justifications they were tossing around. "I've been supporting you for years. I paid off Dad's hospital bills when he had that surgery. I covered the mortgage when the bank threatened foreclosure. I renovated the lake cottage, gave Liam money every time he decided to switch majors or drop a semester. Do none of those sacrifices matter?" Mom heaved a dramatic sigh, shaking her head. "We never forced you to do any of that," she said firmly. "You made choices, Sara, and that's on you. Besides, you know family is about more than money. We never wanted you to think you could buy love or approval." Liam let out a scoff, and Leona chortled in agreement. I stared at them both, my pulse roaring in my ears, flabbergasted by the sheer cruelty of their words. These were the same 2 siblings who had come to me in tears, or near tears, time and time again, asking me for help. Now they acted like I'd just been throwing money around for fun. I felt my cheeks burn with a wave of fury I could barely contain. I forced myself to speak calmly. "So, this is it," I said, laying my palms on the table. "You're leaving me nothing after all I've contributed, and you expect me to just sit here and be fine with it because, in your view, I'm already well off?" Leona shrugged, playing with the hem of her blouse. "You always liked being the hero," she said. "Maybe you thought buying our affection would make up for the fact that you've never really been around unless we needed something paid off." Before I could even process the sting of her accusation, Liam chimed in. "And let's not forget, big sister, you chose your big job in the city over staying local. You left us to figure everything out at home, so of course Mom and Dad want to ensure we have a safety net. You never needed one. I was at a loss for words, too stunned to see any flicker of remorse in my parents' faces. The betrayal felt bone deep, and all I could manage was a curt nod. I stood, pushing back my chair with a grating scrape against the tile floor. "Fine," I whispered, not trusting my voice to go any louder. "If that's how you all feel, then so be it. You won't have to worry about me meddling again. My wallet is closed, and you can count me out of any more family obligations." Turning on my heel, I walked out of the dining room, coat in hand, ignoring Mom's call after me. I barely remembered getting into my car. My head spun, my throat closing up with unshed tears. During the drive back to my downtown apartment, I felt as if everything I'd ever known about my family had shattered in the span of a single meal. That night, sleep was impossible. I sat in my kitchen, staring at my phone screen, where the automatic payment reminders glowed accusingly. I canceled everything in one fell swoop. The mortgage payment, the utility bills, the little monthly deposits into Liam's and Leona's accounts. My heart pounded in my chest, half expecting a wave of guilt to overtake me, but something surprising happened instead. Felt free. In the days that followed, the calls came. First Mom, then Dad, then Liam and Leona, each with their own angle. My mother's calls were full of disappointed sighs, telling me I was overreacting and acting ungrateful. My father tried the calm approach, reminding me that this was their family decision and that I should accept it gracefully. Liam and Leona were the worst, fluctuating between mocking sarcasm and whiny pleas for me to come to my senses. By the end of the week, I blocked all their numbers, leaving myself some semblance of peace. For 3 blessed weeks, I heard nothing. I poured my energy into Bennett Construction, the firm where I worked. We were finalizing a medical complex in Sacramento, and that project consumed every ounce of my attention. When I was at the office, I could pretend my personal life wasn't unraveling. Then one afternoon, a single text from Mom blazed across my screen. "Family meeting tonight. You owe it to us to be here." My hands shook as I read it, my heart skittering in my chest. 100 reasons not to go filled my head, but despite everything, a small part of me still yearned for resolution. Perhaps foolishly, I replied with one word: fine. Their house felt like hostile territory the moment I arrived. Liam's motorcycle and Leona's bright blue compact car were out front. My parents must have been waiting because Mom opened the door almost as soon as I reached the top step. The tension in her voice was palpable. "Sara, thank you for coming," she said stiffly, ushering me inside. In the living room, Dad stood near the fireplace, arms crossed. Liam and Leona sat together on the couch, exchanging secretive smirks. I noticed Aunt Daisy, my mother's younger sister, sitting in a corner, quietly observing. Daisy's presence surprised me because she rarely involved herself in family drama. She gave me a sympathetic smile, but it did little to ease my nerves. "We want to clear the air," Dad began, in the deep paternal tone that once carried so much authority. "Your mother and I thought you would see reason by now, Sara. We gave you time to calm down, but apparently, you're determined to remain upset." A bitter laugh escaped me. "Remain upset," I repeated. "You blindsided me. You gave everything to Liam and Leona after years of me supporting you in secret, paying your bills, covering the house when it was in danger. How am I supposed to react?" Dad's gaze hardened. "You need to grow up. We did what's best for your siblings. You have a lucrative career, a secure future. They need a foundation, and we, as their parents, have a right to provide that." I turned my gaze to Mom. "And do you really think it's fair to erase all my contributions like they never existed? Was that your goal all along?" Mom didn't reply immediately, but her posture was rigid. "You're our oldest child, Sara," she said coolly. "You were always the most responsible, the one we could rely on. That's why we trusted you to succeed. Your siblings need us more, so we decided to take care of them." "That's it then," I murmured, feeling my throat constrict around a rising wave of fury. "That's your justification for this betrayal, for all the ways you used me." Liam gave a mocking snort, crossing his arms. "Bear us, big sis. You chose to help, you liked acting superior. Don't blame us for your choices." "Enough," I snapped, turning to my father. "If you all don't want me in your will, fine. But stop expecting me to bankroll your lifestyle. I'm done making any sacrifices. If that means you won't welcome me back, so be it." Leona rolled her eyes. "You're always so dramatic. Nobody's banning you from anything, we just don't think you need anything more. Why can't you just accept that?" Dad stepped forward, voice rising. "If you walk out that door now, don't expect to be part of this family anymore." I froze, feeling a painful knot tighten in my chest, though my decision was already made. "I've never felt like I was part of this family anyway," I said, and I spun on my heel, heading for the exit. Once I was back in my car, tears streamed down my cheeks, hot and relentless. I felt numb, hollow, like the ground I stood on had been yanked away. I thought about the countless times I'd believed, perhaps naively, that my parents actually appreciated my efforts, that we were united by love. But their actions spoke otherwise. Any illusions I had left were gone. In the weeks that followed, the tension escalated into open hostility. The phone calls I had once blocked came at me through alternate numbers. Mom left voicemails dripping with anger, accusing me of turning my back on them. Dad's messages were stern, telling me I had a duty to respect their decision. Liam's and Leona's words ranged from mocking me to flat-out cursing me for stopping the money flow. When it became clear I wouldn't budge, they resorted to public shaming. Extended relatives started hearing twisted half-truths about how I'd abandoned my family or tried to control them with money. The lies spread quickly, thanks to Mom's dramatic retellings and Dad's stony nods of agreement. People I hadn't heard from in years started posting cryptic comments on social media, hinting that I was selfish or had lost my moral compass. At first, I wanted to crawl under my blankets and hide from the world. But anger brewed inside me, giving me a sharp, newfound resolve. If they insisted on painting me as the villain, then I would let the full truth come to light. One night I made a long, detailed post outlining every monthly payment, every bailout, every covered medical bill or tuition fee. I described all the times I canceled personal plans or big opportunities just to keep my parents financially afloat. Within hours, the post had garnered hundreds of reactions and countless comments. Some offered empathy, while others chastised me for airing private family matters. Then came the family backlash. My phone buzzed incessantly with texts and calls, mostly from my parents and siblings, all enraged that I had dared to fight back with honesty. "You have no right to shame us in front of everyone," Mom screamed in a voicemail. "We're your parents. This is a family matter, and you're hurting your father and me deeply with your vindictiveness." I listened to her voicemail with a trembling hand. Memories of every sacrifice I had made began flashing through my mind. All the times I let them guilt-trip me into paying for something. All the times I had tried to please them by making sure no one went without. The betrayal felt bottomless. One week after my social media post, I came home from a business trip to find my apartment door sealed shut with rock-hard foam. The lock, the frame, every seam had been vandalized. My heart pounded, fury mingling with a dreadful certainty. I knew without a doubt who was behind it. I alerted building management and waited for a locksmith to carefully chip away at the foam, seething as he commented on how malicious the act was. By the time he managed to free the door, it was nearing midnight. My suspicions solidified into fact the moment I checked my hallway security camera footage. There, in grainy clarity, was Liam, wearing a hoodie and baseball cap, carefully spraying foam into my doorframe. He looked almost gleeful, like a child pulling a prank, not caring how destructive it was. Hurt and disbelief tangled in my chest. My own brother had escalated our family feud into a crime. I called Aunt Daisy, the only relative I truly trusted. Her quiet voice was steady as she said, "Sara, you should report him. If you let him get away with this, he'll never learn." Filing that police report felt surreal. I handed over the security footage, my stomach twisting with guilt and anger. Almost immediately, the entire family erupted. My parents left raging messages, calling me dramatic for involving the cops. Liam spat venomous insults, calling me a traitor. Leona declared that I'd ruined their lives and was only doing this to get back at them because I wasn't chosen to inherit the house and cottage. In a call full of cold fury, Dad demanded to know how much money it would take for me to drop the charges. I told him, with a calmness that surprised even me, that Liam owed me the cost of repairing my door and frame, $3,000. Dad accused me of extortion. I told him it was simply the price of the damage his son had caused, and that if Liam chose not to pay, then the charges would stand. Less than a day later, I woke up to find a $3,000 transfer in my bank account, labeled with a resentful note, "Final payment." Though the ordeal was laced with bitterness, I couldn't ignore the flicker of victory kindling inside me. My family had crossed an unforgivable line, and I had finally defended myself, forcing them to face consequences. I no longer had to wonder whether they cared about the pain they caused me. Their actions, vandalism, harassment, slander, spoke plainly. All illusions were gone. After that incident, there was finally a lull. The calls stopped. The barrage of angry messages died down. My parents, presumably, had decided that I was irredeemable, and Liam and Leona focused on painting me as the black sheep to anyone who would listen. In the quiet that followed, I found myself unsure of how to move forward. The last tattered bits of my relationship with them seemed severed for good. I turned my energy toward building a life that was truly mine. With no more monthly family expenses draining my income, I allowed myself to dream bigger. I found a cozy condo in a nicer part of town, something I never would have done before for fear of my parents calling it frivolous. I booked a trip to Italy, marveling at the swirl of possibilities now open to me. For the first time in my life, I realized that success was something I could enjoy rather than hide or apologize for. In Florence, I stood on a terrace overlooking the city at dusk, the pinkish sky fading into a soft purple. A glass of rich wine in hand, I felt an unexpected surge of contentment. The old me would have felt guilty about indulging in such a trip, would have worried about what my family needed next. Now I breathed in the Italian air, soaking in the moment without apology. Even so, I couldn't fully escape the shadows of the past. Some nights, alone in my hotel room, I'd think about childhood memories. Holidays spent around the Christmas tree, birthdays with homemade cakes, long summers at the lake cottage. A pang of loss would grip my heart, reminding me that no matter how justified my decisions were, I'd lost something irreplaceable, the comforting illusion of a united family. When I returned home, Aunt Daisy was waiting at my new condo. She brought me flowers and gave me the warmest hug, tears in her eyes. She told me she was proud of me, proud that I'd finally stood up for myself. Daisy mentioned that Mom was working a menial job at a diner, that Dad had taken on physically demanding shifts at a hardware store. Liam was drifting yet again, jobless and living off occasional odd gigs, while Leona clung to fleeting fantasies of social media stardom. The house I once helped maintain so diligently was apparently falling into disrepair, and they no longer had my financial cushion to keep everything afloat. Does it make me a bad person if part of me feels vindicated? I asked Daisy quietly, guilt gnawing at me. They're struggling now, but is that my fault? Daisy squeezed my hand. Consequences are not your fault, Sara. Your parents and siblings chose to use you as a financial crutch for years. They never budgeted, never planned for the future. Don't let them make you feel guilty for finally walking away. You have to live your life. I nodded, tears pricking my eyes. The part of me that wanted to save everyone was still there, buried beneath layers of resentment and pain. But I listened to Aunt Daisy's wise counsel. She was right. As much as it hurt, my parents, Liam and Leona, had to face the results of their own choices. Being an adult meant accepting responsibility, something they had always tried to shift onto me. Work at Bennett Construction soared. My boss praised my dedication, especially during the final stages of the Sacramento project. I found myself enjoying work again, free from the constant pressure of my family's needs. Slowly, I opened up to new friendships, even started dating. On a group hike with some friends, I met Alex, a soft-spoken engineer who shared my love for nature and stargazing. He asked me questions about my life, not just my job or finances, and seemed genuinely interested in who I was as a person. Through all these positive changes, I still wrestled with twinges of sorrow whenever I scrolled past old family photos or recalled precious childhood memories. But the sorrow no longer crippled me. It was like a scar, no longer bleeding yet tender when pressed. I allowed myself to accept that those memories were real, that the love I had once felt for my family had also been real, even if it wasn't returned in the way I deserved. Time moved on, and little by little, the drama quieted. Extended relatives who once judged me harshly either apologized or moved on to new gossip. My parents and siblings seemed to vanish from my life. The few times I saw them on social media, it was via random pictures or updates posted by someone else. Each image looked forced, as though they were straining to appear happy. On a brisk autumn afternoon, I got a call from my father. I nearly dropped my phone in shock. We hadn't spoken in months, not since the fallout around Liam's vandalism. With a trembling hand, I answered. Dad's voice was subdued, lacking its usual gruff authority. He admitted that he and Mom were facing significant financial trouble, that the house needed major repairs. My siblings weren't helping, and the mortgage was in arrears again. Your mother's health isn't what it used to be, he said quietly. We can barely manage these bills, Sara. I know we haven't treated you fairly. I know we hurt you. But you're still our daughter. I closed my eyes, tears burning behind my lids. Even after everything, a part of me ached to help them. But I remembered with a clear head all the manipulation, all the disrespect, all the ways they twisted my kindness into an obligation. I took a slow breath. Dad, I began, my voice steady. I'm sorry you and Mom are struggling. But I spent years sacrificing for you. I paid your mortgage, your bills, everything. You repaid me by cutting me out and telling people I abandoned you. I can't just forget that. A long silence stretched over the line. Then he muttered, I understand. We'll figure something out. He didn't say goodbye, just hung up, leaving me holding the phone with shaking hands. After that call, a wave of guilt threatened to swallow me. I considered, momentarily, stepping back in to help them. But Aunt Daisy, when I told her about the conversation, reminded me again. They must learn, Sara. If you step in now, the cycle will continue. I let the tears flow, but I did not pick up the phone to offer more money. Instead, I focused on my own well-being, my own future. Day by day, the guilt receded, replaced by acceptance. I found new purpose in my friendships, in my relationship with Alex, in the corners of life I never used to have time for. I spent my weekends hiking scenic trails, visiting art galleries, or simply savoring the silence of my condo. My success at work continued to grow, unhampered by crises that weren't mine to own. I realized with a quiet awe that this was what real freedom felt like. Months turned into a year. My parents eventually sold the lake cottage to cover their debts, the same cottage I had renovated at great personal cost. Liam hopped from job to job, still clinging to the notion that someone else should bail him out whenever he failed. Leona's social media ambitions never panned out, and the influencer career she'd dreamt of fizzled. Though the idea made me sad at times, I also recognized it was exactly the kind of reality check they all needed. One bright morning, Alex proposed to me at the summit of a beautiful hiking trail overlooking a misty green valley. He knelt, breathless from our climb, and told me he admired my courage, my determination, my capacity to rise after being knocked down by life's painful blows. He said I was stronger than I knew, and he wanted to stand beside me as we built a future that was ours alone. Tears streamed down my cheeks, and I said yes. The ring on my finger felt like a symbol of hope, a new chapter untainted by old betrayals. As the wedding date approached, Aunt Daisy helped me with the preparations, acting more like a mother than my own had ever been. A small, intimate gathering in a lush garden felt right. Some part of me wrestled with inviting my parents, but a larger part knew it would only invite more trouble and heartbreak. I penned a short, honest letter explaining that I had found my own happiness and that I hoped they would one day find peace. I did not invite them to attend, and Daisy supported my choice wholeheartedly. On the afternoon of the ceremony, I could hardly believe the wave of emotion coursing through me. Surrounded by friends who genuinely cared, I walked down a makeshift aisle lined with wildflowers. Daisy wiped her tears as I passed, while a handful of close colleagues from Bennett Construction smiled encouragingly. Alex looked at me like I was the only person in the universe. The exchange of vows was brief and heartfelt. There was no tension, no drama. Just love, honesty, and promise. We sealed our marriage with a kiss under the warm summer sun, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt wholly content. The ghosts of my past pain still lingered at the edges of my consciousness, but they did not define the present. I could finally see how far I'd come, how much I'd grown since that horrible night of betrayal at my parents' dinner table. After our wedding, Alex and I enjoyed a serene week in the mountains. Each morning I woke to birdsong, to crisp air, to a peaceful heart. One evening, as we sat by a flickering campfire, he reached for my hand. "Are you happy, Sara?" he asked softly, concern touching his gaze. "Truly happy." I thought back on the path that had led me here, from the moment my family's betrayal was laid bare to the countless tears I'd shed in lonely darkness. And yet, here I was, forging a new life built on self-respect and love. I squeezed his hand. Yes, I whispered, and I meant it. More than I ever thought possible. Time passed. My life with Alex settled into an uplifting rhythm. We traveled, both for work and pleasure, expanding our perspectives and forging deeper bonds together. Every so often, news of my family would reach me via acquaintances or distant relatives. Sometimes it stung, finding out that my parents had to downsize, or that Liam had crashed on their couch after another failed stint in a city far away. But the guilt didn't weigh me down like before. One rainy afternoon, a letter arrived at my office. The return address belonged to my mother, and my heart fluttered with conflicting emotions as I carefully opened it. Her handwriting was uneven, a trembling scrawl that hinted at her declining health. She wrote that she missed me, that perhaps they had been too harsh, and she hoped I could forgive them. At the bottom, she left a phone number and asked me to call. I sat with that letter for hours, turning it over in my hands. Memories flooded in, some warm, some cold. I wrestled with the idea of reconnecting. Daisy's advice echoed in my head. People can change, yes, but not always in the ways we want. Ultimately, I did call, wanting to at least hear what Mom had to say. She sounded tired, older, and somewhat regretful, though the words apology or remorse never quite escaped her lips. She complained about Dad's moodiness, about Liam's continued irresponsibility, about Leona's inability to hold down a real job. Then she asked how I was doing, but when I told her about my new life, she fell silent, as if it made her uncomfortable. When she finally got around to the real point, my suspicion was confirmed. "We're in a tough spot, Sara," she admitted, "and we could really use." I closed my eyes and let out a long exhale. "Money, right, Mom? That's what you need from me again." Her hesitation spoke volumes. She tried to frame it more gently, but it was too late. My mother's illusions cracked under the weight of her own desperation. Hearing it in her voice, I felt a strange mixture of pity and relief. The cycle was still the same. Some lessons are never learned unless one chooses to learn them. "I'm sorry," I said, tears stinging my eyes, "but you'll have to figure this out without me. I hope you understand." She sighed, then mumbled a quiet goodbye, and that was that. I felt no satisfaction in turning her down. Only a sense of finality that told me I was making the healthy choice for once. Life continued onward, and as seasons changed, so did my perspective. The sting of betrayal that once colored my every waking moment dulled to a manageable ache. My parents had taught me an unexpected lesson. My worth was never meant to be measured by how much I could give until I was empty. I learned how to set boundaries and how to love myself without shame. Alex and I built a cozy life, filled with open communication and support. We hosted small get-togethers with friends and traveled across Europe, Asia, and South America, experiencing new cultures. Each adventure brought me a step further from the pain of my past. Aunt Daisy remained my steadfast ally, dropping by occasionally for dinner and sharing laughter that felt genuine and warm. One day, as we strolled through a local park, Alex and I came upon a tranquil pond surrounded by blossoming trees. The serene setting reminded me, for some reason, of the lake cottage I had once poured thousands of dollars into. I recalled the scent of pine, the echo of loons over the water at dawn, the gentle waves lapping at the shoreline. My parents had sold it to cover their debts, but the memories still felt oddly peaceful. Perhaps, in some other universe, we could have enjoyed that place as a true family. But in my reality, it had become a symbol of my exploitation. As we paused by the pond, Alex slipped his arm around me, and I leaned my head on his shoulder, content in the knowledge that the family I had now was one I chose, one that chose me in return. For a time, I thought that chapter of my life was closed for good. Then, one spring morning, Aunt Daisy showed up at my doorstep, breathing heavily as if she'd been running. I ushered her inside, alarmed by the anxious look on her face. She pressed a worn envelope into my hands. It was from my father, sealed and slightly crumpled. "He's in the hospital," Daisy said, voice trembling. "He had a serious fall at the hardware store and he's in bad shape, Sara. Your mother doesn't know how to reach you since you changed your number, and she asked me to find you to give you this." My pulse sped up as I tore open the envelope. Inside was a short letter, penned in Dad's unmistakable, neat handwriting. He wrote that he was sorry for how everything had turned out, that he never should have let their grievances push me away. He admitted he had resented my success because it reminded him of his own failings. He confessed that watching Liam spiral made him realize how much I'd actually done for them all. The letter ended with a plea for me to visit. "If nothing else," he wrote, "please let me see you one more time. I don't want to leave this world with things left unsaid." Tears dripped onto the page, staining the ink. I felt a deep ache in my chest. The old me might have rushed straight to the hospital, willing to fix everything with money, love, or forgiveness. But I was no longer that person. The wounds, though healed on the surface, were profound. Guilt and old affection warred inside me. Daisy touched my arm gently, as if sensing my turmoil. "What do you want to do, Sara?" I didn't have an immediate answer. Alex found me later, sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the letter. He knelt beside me, wrapped me in a tender hug, and whispered, "It's your call. Whatever you choose, I'll support you." By nightfall I made my decision. I would go, not to hand over more money or to beg for acceptance, but to say whatever I needed to say so that I could truly move on, free of resentment or regret. The next morning, Daisy drove me to the hospital. The hallways smelled of antiseptic and echoed with hushed voices. My hands trembled as I approached the room number Daisy had given me. Inside, Dad lay in a bed, for lines snaking around his arm. His hair was thinner, grayer than I remembered, and he looked frail in a way that made my heart twist. Mom was at his side, tears brimming as she caught sight of me. Her eyes held a mixture of guilt, relief, and maybe a trace of hope. Liam stood by the window, arms folded, while Leona sat in a plastic chair, glancing up with an unsettled expression. They all fell silent as I entered. Dad's eyes met mine, and for a moment I saw the father I once adored, the man who taught me to ride a bike, the one whose laughter boomed through the house when I was a child. A shaky smile flickered across his face. "Sara," he whispered, voice rasping. "Came." I stepped closer, Daisy right behind me. I didn't return his smile immediately. I just stood there, watching him struggle to sit up, to regain some semblance of his old authority. Then, in a voice hardly above a whisper, he said, "I'm sorry. I should have given you the respect you deserved. I should have." His words trailed off, grief thick in the pause. Mom wiped her eyes and reached out for me, but her hand stopped short in the air. "We were wrong, Sara," she admitted, trembling. "We didn't appreciate you, and we lost you because of it." A sharp pang tore through me, tears misting my vision as I recalled all the hurtful things they'd said. I stared at Liam and Leona. They offered no direct apology, but I saw shame in their downcast gazes. Whether they would ever truly repent, I didn't know. But for the first time they weren't sneering or making a joke out of my pain. Dad reached for my hand, and I let him take it. His grip was weak. "I came today to say what I need to say," I told him, my voice firm but filled with emotion. "I can't forget how you betrayed me or how you all treated me. But I've grown, and I want you to know that despite it all, I did love you. I still do, in a way, even though I can't go back to how things were." He closed his eyes, tears leaking onto his pillow. "Understand. Thank you for coming, for giving me the chance to say I'm sorry." I nodded, feeling a bittersweet sense of release in that moment. Part of me wished things could have been different, that we'd never traveled down this path. But I also recognized that I was finally free of the bitterness that had once consumed me. Sometimes all anyone can do is speak the truth, accept what is given, and move forward. Mom sobbed quietly, burying her face in her hands. I stepped back, letting go of Dad's fragile hand, and turned to the door. Liam hovered near the window, looking like he wanted to speak but couldn't form the words. Leona's eyes brimmed with tears that never fell. Aunt Daisy placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. "Are you ready?" she asked gently. "Yes," I breathed, and we left the room together, leaving my family behind. The corridors of the hospital felt brighter somehow, as though a weight had been lifted from my chest. I had said my piece, and even if it didn't mend every rift, it brought a measure of peace I never thought possible. In the days that followed, I heard from Aunt Daisy that Dad's health stabilized. Mom managed to cut back her work hours to stay by his side. Liam and Leona visited often, apparently no longer feeling the same entitlement they once clung to. Whether they would ever truly change was impossible for me to know, but that was no longer my burden. I returned to my life with Alex, and as we prepared for our own future, discussing starting a family, possibly adopting a rescue dog, maybe traveling more, I realized that I finally had a real sense of closure. My parents and siblings had hurt me deeply, but I had risen, chosen my own path, and found love and security without their approval. I had discovered a family in my friends, my aunt, and the man I cherished, one that valued me for who I was, not for what I could give. That, in the end, was my real revenge. Not something fueled by hatred or desire to see them suffer, but a life well lived and free from their control. The drama that began with a single dinner announcement, the inheritance they dangled over my head and used as a weapon, had ultimately spurred me to break free. What they intended as a punishment became my greatest liberation. To anyone reading this, wondering if they should keep sacrificing themselves for a family that doesn't value them, I have only one piece of advice. Your worth isn't determined by how much you give until you're broken. Real love and respect should never demand your self-destruction. It took me years to learn that lesson, but in the end, choosing myself was the only way to find genuine happiness. And yes, the journey was painful. But at last I could breathe again, my heart lighter, my future bright. Despite the scars, my story found its happy ending, shaped by my own choices, guided by a determination to respect and love myself. And that, to me, is the truest form of victory I could ever claim.